It is a beautiful day out here today, and there's nothing better than bringing family and friends together like barbecue and beer. Today, our sponsor, Spike Brewing, provided us with the equipment to make our own homebrew, and let me tell you what, I am super excited to share that experience with you. I'm gonna take you on this journey start to finish, from brewing the beer to bottling the beer to enjoying it on a beautiful summer day with my family and friends. Cheers. It's time to get our brew day started with the Spike Beginners Bundle. I've got some hot tap water here that we will be adding here for this recipe for the Belgian wit beer. We're gonna need 7.5 gallons of water. Now, since I got the kit with the 120 volt operation, it does take a little bit longer to heat up. So starting with a hot tap water is gonna speed up the process quite a bit, because we're already starting with water that's about 115 to 120 degrees. With this recipe, we're looking to get it to about 159. If we're starting with cold tap water, if we're starting with bottled spring water or RO water that you've got filtered from your house, it's gonna be a lot colder, and it's gonna take up to several hours to get this up to temperature. Right now, this water's sitting at about 117 degrees. I can see that with the controller. We're gonna get the rest of the water in here, 7.5 gallons, so that we can get this thing started. We've got our 7.5 gallons of water into the solo kettle, and it is time to get it heated up. Now, the first thing that you need to do is get your valves open. So let's get up front. We're gonna open the valve here for the bottom drain. We're gonna open the valve here for the whirlpool. And we're gonna open the valve here for the pump. Now we come over to the controller and we get this thing set up. Now, as you can see on the screen here, we are set to mash. That is the mode that we need to be in. And turn the pump on. We're gonna turn the heating element on. We're gonna come over here to the dial here. The recipe calls for 159 degrees, but we're actually gonna set it a couple degrees higher to about 162. We're gonna click the center of the dial. It's gonna lock that in place. We've got our pump on, we've got our heater on. It's time to get this water up to temp. At this point, the best thing to do is grab a beer. But before we do, we need to put half of that water clarifying tablet. It is a small white tablet. It is the Camden, and oh, it's much more brittle than I expected. Now we're gonna take half of this tablet and we need to crush it up and add it to the kettle. But it is so brittle that I can just pinch it between my fingers and get it added down into the pot. Now at this point, we just need the water to get up to temperature. We're up at 158 degrees now. We're gonna go ahead and shut the pump off. We need to come up front and we need to close the valves off as well. So now at this point, the water is up to temperature. We need to add the other half of that Camden tablet in. And I found that this crushes actually really well with just your fingers. So put that in there and give it a quick little stir. So it's basically time to get the grains in. Now let's get started with that. Now we've got everything turned off here. Pumps off, elements off, hoses are in place. We've moved the hose from the whirlpool up to the basket. It's time to add the grains. Now at this point, it's best to have a partner. So I've got Rick here. He's gonna come over and help me stir this in. Hang the lid off the back. And we're gonna slowly add these grains that come with the recipe kit from Spike Brewing into the solo kettle here. Temperatures are reading are about 158 to 160. It's fluctuating a few degrees, which they say is normal. Smells good. Oh, smells great. What we were doing here by mixing it is making sure that the grains were saturated all the way through. So just to make sure that that continues to happen, we're gonna let this sit and settle for about the next 10 minutes. Pumps are off, elements are off, everything is off. We're gonna get the lid back onto it here, let these grains saturate. We let our grains submerge in here for 10 minutes. They are looking like they're nicely saturated. There's no clumps that we've seen. It's time to start the next process, which is the mashing process. So the first thing that you have to do is come over to your controller. You're gonna turn your element back on, and you wanna make sure that it's set to 152 degrees, which is what we have it set for here. Now the next step is about the pump and the valves. And before we do this, we're gonna talk very briefly about that. We wanna be quick. We don't ever wanna starve water of the pump. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is come over here to my bottom drain, and I'm actually gonna open this up completely. Anytime that we're running the pump, we wanna make sure that that valve is open all the way. We're gonna control flow with the ball valve coming off the output of the pump, and it's going to be draining back in through the mash through this rubber hose. So I'm gonna come around to the front, I'm gonna flip my pump on, and then I'm just going to slowly open this valve open, and I'm watching to make sure we're not making a big mess up here into the mash. Everything here looks good. We've got it set to the 152 degrees. The pump is running, water is flowing. This next step is an hour process. Get your lid back on and grab another beer. While you're in the mashing process, it's always a good idea to occasionally stir just to avoid any potential stuck mashes. As you can see here, grains look nice and saturated, no major clumps, but we are still going to continue to stir occasionally. So we're just about up at the 1 hour point on the mashing phase. Now, one of the pro tips that's included in the manual is to shut the pump off, and that's just so everything settles. We're going to come over here. We're going to flip the pump off. We're going to set a timer for 5 minutes so everything can start to settle. We've let the grains settle. It is time to actually strain them and wash or filter through the grain one last time. But take the lid off here. And what you need to do on the back of this basket when we lift it up, I'm going to get some help here if you want to grab that. On the back of the basket there are 2 hooks, and they actually go right on the back lip of the kettle, and so that the basket can strain here. Now at this point the pump is off. We've turned that off 5 minutes ago. What they want us to do now is to turn the pump back on, and that's going to filter through or rinse these grains. We're going to do this for 10 minutes. So we've been filtering here for about 10 minutes now. It is time to turn the pump off. I'm going to come over here. We're going to flip the pump off. Then we need to come up front here. We need to close the valves. We're going to let this continue to drain all of that goodness out of the grains. And once we no longer hear any of the dripping coming from this basket, then we know it's time to get it out. We've let the grains drain here, and in the meantime, we moved the hose from the basket down to the whirlpool, and we moved from the bottom drain to the racking. We also need to get the element back on, but now we're gonna be setting this to boil. So we're gonna turn this knob here. It's gonna set that to boil, and we're gonna turn this on. That's gonna get us into the 200-degree range. Otherwise, we are done with the grains themselves. You can do whatever you want with them. We are actually going to save these for compost. At this point though, we're pretty much done until it's boiling. We're gonna get the lid back on it, grab another beer. We're at 207 degrees on the kettle. It is time to add the hops. And the nice thing about the recipe kits that you can get from Spike Brewing is they come with everything you need. So we're talking the yeast, the flavors, the hops, the grains. For this, we're gonna be using some Saaz hops. It's time to get them added in. Everything is pre-portioned. You don't have to worry about any measurements or anything like that. It's exact amounts for this recipe. We're gonna go ahead, get the lid on, and you're gonna set yourself a timer for 45 minutes. The instructions may say an hour, but the reason we're saying 45 is because that's how many minutes it is until the next step. So grab yourself a beer, and we'll see you then. We're 45 minutes into the boil, and we need to add the Whirlfloc tablet. We're gonna go ahead and drop that down into the kettle. Get this closed, and we're gonna set a timer for 5 more minutes. At that point, we're gonna be adding the bitter orange peel and the coriander. All right, we're at a point now where it's time to add the flavors. So we've got some bitter orange peel that we're gonna sprinkle in here. And then we also have a pouch of coriander. Both of these are 1 ounce each, but once again, that's the nice thing about this recipe kit. Everything comes pre-measured. We'll give this a good stir here. And we're gonna set a timer for 10 more minutes. So the boiling process is done. Now it's time to do a whirlpool. This is gonna congregate all the sediment into the bottom, into that conical shaped bottom of this, and it's gonna keep everything circulating. We're gonna wanna do this for 10 minutes. Now when we do this, you gotta make sure your hoses are in the right place. So coming out of the kettle, we are going from the racking port, going down into the pump, and then from the pump back into the whirlpool port. So we wanna make sure that these are completely open. We're gonna crack the valve here on the pump. We're gonna come over here to the controller. We're gonna turn the element off and we're gonna turn the pump on. We're gonna wanna whirlpool this for 10 minutes. It's gonna gather all that sediment and then we're gonna let it rest for 5. We're gonna do all of that and we'll see you when we're done and ready to chill it. So we've just finished up our 10 minutes of whirlpooling. You can see here through the steam that the wort is spinning very gently. That means all the sediment is gathering down there in the bottom of the kettle here. We're gonna come over to our controller and we're gonna turn the pump off. We're gonna let this sit for 5 minutes while we get our chiller set up. We're at the point in the process where the beer needs to be put into the fermenter. Now there's a couple different options here. With our kit from Spike Brewing, we do not have a wort chiller. So the process itself would be to move the wort into the fermenter, and we would have to wait hours or maybe days for this to go from 181 degrees down to about 68 degrees. Now that part of the process could be a painful process because we're talking about days. The other option is a wort chiller. Now with this, I do not have the wort chiller, but we have one here that has been used on previous batches of beer and it works perfectly. It is a home setup. Essentially what a wort chiller is gonna do is you've got a pipe or a tube running inside of a tube. The inner tube has the beer, the hot wort essentially. The outer tube is gonna be cold water. So what you're doing is you're cross flowing like this. Now you're not introducing water into the wort, it's just surrounding that inner tube and it's gonna chill that beer a lot faster. So rather than wait potentially 2 days for this to drop from 181 to about 68 degrees, we're gonna use our homemade chiller to drop this down to about that 68 degree range, what we're looking for with this recipe, in a matter of maybe 10 or 15 minutes. We've got our wort into the fermenter. It's sitting at about 70 degrees, and I know that because Spike includes a stick-on thermometer that we've got attached to the side. It's reading 70 degrees. It's time to add the yeast. We're gonna sprinkle this in. And one of the keys to working with your fermenter is anytime you touch anything from the outside world to the inside world, it has to be sanitized. So this spoon, sanitized. Fermenter, sanitized. All of the gaskets, fittings, sanitized. That's part of the game. We don't want to introduce any bacteria into our wort because now that we're down at this temperature, this is optimal conditions for bacteria to grow. We're gonna give this a gentle stir, and the friends that I have here today have been doing home brews for 30 years with over 200 batches of experience, and they have a little tip that they want to introduce to our brew today, and that's gonna be using an oxygenator, or to add oxygen to our wort.
We got our oxygen tank that's got a regulator on it, hose, filter, and a stone on the bottom. The end of this has been sanitized from the filter down. Gonna put that in and crack open the regulator until we just start to see some bubbles. Well, I'm gonna slow it down just a bit, and we're gonna set a timer for 2 minutes. Then we're gonna seal it up.
So when it comes to being sanitary with your wort, you gotta make sure that you sanitize everything, like I said, from the outside world to the inside world of this fermenter. So we have some sanitizing agent in here. I'm gonna spray my hands to make sure that I'm sanitary. Now we've got our lid to the fermenter. We're gonna make sure that the gasket, the lid, and every part of the inside of this lid is sanitary. Place this lid just like so. Get the clamps started. Gonna add some sanitizer here to the bubbler, and there's a line that is on here so that we know that we've got enough. So the bubbler here is basically like a check valve. We've got it sanitized
We've got sanitizer in there, and essentially what this is to prevent outside air from getting in to induce bacteria growth, but also allow the gases from the fermentation process to escape. Pretty customary in any kind of brewing or fermentation process. We're pretty much done brewing today. The rest of the process in the fermenter is gonna take on average about 10 to 14 days. One of the indicators that we're gonna use is this bubbler. We wanna make sure that it's allowing gases to escape, and we will see some pretty crazy activity coming from that in the next few days. That will start to seize, and we will see much less activity the further we get into that 10 to 14 day period. And that activity is what we're gonna use to determine whether or not this wort has turned into beer and if it's ready to be bottled. But now for the rest of the process for us today is to clean all of this equipment, all of the spoons, the basket, the kettle, the valves, the gaskets, everything. And we will see you in about 10 to 14 days when it's ready to bottle.
3 days and a few beers later.
Guys, we're on day 3 right now of the brewing process. We've got our wort in the flex fermenter, and there's nothing cooler than seeing that bubble action coming up through the bubbler, because that means we're making beer. Unfortunately, we got about 10 more days, but we will see you then when it's time to bottle. So we're at the second most exciting day when it comes to the beer process. Number 1 is gonna be tasting it, but number 2 is gonna be bottling it. And we're here with our flex fermenter. When it comes to bottling this beer, we got everything that we needed from Spike Brewing. That includes 4 dozen bottles for this recipe kit, the capper, all the caps, we've got the sanitizer. We also have these carbonation drops. This is basically sugar and glucose that we're gonna drop in to reactivate that yeast to create more carbonation in the bottles for the next couple weeks while they rest. All of this is gonna be a process when it comes to bottling because it's about cleanliness. Everything that we touch and everything that we do is gonna need to be sanitized. So we're gonna set up a few different stations. We're gonna do sanitizing, bottling, capping, etc. So I've got some friends over here and we're gonna get started. It's time to sanitize the bottles. We're gonna use some Star San. We've got 2 gallons of hot water here. We've got a ½ ounce of Star San we're gonna add to this. Basically what we're using this bucket for is to take the bottles, to dip them in, swirl the solution and sanitizer around in it. That way we're starting off with a good, clean, sanitized bottle. Now, like I said before, everything that we use in this process is gonna have to be sanitized. The caps, they're gonna have to be sanitized. The hose coming from the flex fermenter is gonna have to be sanitized. The bottling wand is gonna have to be sanitized. Everything that we use, including our hands, anything that's gonna be touching the beer, anything that could introduce bacteria into our beer is gonna have to be sanitized. So this whole setup that we're doing here is about cleanliness and efficiency. So we've got it set up to where we can hook the hose up here to the fermenter. We're gonna have everything sanitized. We're gonna be ready to bottle. Let's get started.
I think this is a perfect time to tell everyone watching that if you're looking to get into one of these Spike Beginner Bundles, or if you're looking to upgrade your system, you can use promo code SMOKESHOW10 to save yourself 10% off this system.
We are actually 1 bottle short of 2 cases of beer. So that's 47 bottles of beer. This is gonna give you a little idea of what we're left with at the bottom of the flex fermenter. The nice thing about this flex fermenter is the conical shape that it has at the bottom. So it allows all the sediment, all that yeast, everything to settle down to the bottom so that when we're actually siphoning this beer out, we're not exactly grabbing much of that. Though we did see a little yeast come into the first couple bottles. We were sure to strain that out first, but no problems there. Now that we've got this done, we're gonna leave this down here in the laundry room because it's a perfect temperature. We're gonna allow that sugar to reactivate that yeast and carbonate those bottles. Now at this point, it's a waiting game. And just like that, the bottling process is done. And the worst part about this is when you know what you're getting for Christmas, but you still have to wait. We got about 2 weeks to let this sit in the bottle with those sugar caplets to let that yeast reactivate and to carbonate this beer. We want to keep this still at a lower temperature, around that 68 degrees like we did while we were fermenting. So it's going to stay here in my laundry room until that part of the process is done, and then it'll be time to chill it, serve, and enjoy. It's been a long month, guys, but cheers. We did it.
Cheers.
One of the best things about beer is bringing people together, just like barbecue. We've got some ribs, we've got some burgers, and we've got some good beer that we brewed ourselves in my garage. First off, I want to say thank you. Both of you guys made this process extremely easy. I've never brewed beer before. This was a learning process. I think for me, having an awesome kit like the Spike Brewing Beginners Bundle that they've put together for us, and they sponsored this video, thanks to them. For me, having that nice equipment only goes so far because you have to have the knowledge. And though they put great instructions together with the equipment, it was little things like just keeping things sanitary or sanitized as we're going through the process. That's like one area that I would have never guessed that we had to be so strict. But overall, this entire process, from putting it together to brewing our first batch to fermenting it to bottling it, and now 4 or 5 weeks later we're drinking it, and it's actually a really good beer. This is the Belgian wit beer, right? That's what we did. And one of the reasons why I asked you guys to be a part of this is because I knew nothing about this. This is the first beer that I've ever brewed, and I'm so happy that it came out so well. I would have never guessed that. But you guys have been doing this for nearly 30 years.
Yes. About that.
Nearly 30 years. Yeah. What were your thoughts on the Spike Brewing Beginners Bundle with the solo kettle and the flex fermenter? What were your thoughts with the equipment, the process, and obviously the final product?
Well, I think for me, when I first saw it, it looked almost intimidating. When you first see it, it looks like a professional brewery scaled down to a single batch, right? But getting into it, it's super easy. I thought it was intuitive to put it together.
Yes.
I thought the brewing process and the instructions that they gave you were really easy to follow. And we took some notes and added our little experience to it all the way through it. But I was really impressed.
Yeah, high quality equipment. I was really happy with the way everything went together. Like Rick said, it's like you're dealing with professional brewing equipment at the home brewer scale. And the first recipe, this is a fine beer. It was easy to brew and easy to put together, first of all, and then an easy brew day.
Yeah, this is easily as good as just about any beer we've done.
Granted, that comes with 30 years of experience, right? This may be the first beer we've brewed in the Spike Brewing Beginners Bundle and in their equipment, but you have 30 years of knowledge that you brought to our brew day, essentially. When you look at how professional this equipment, like you mentioned, how professional it was and the scale of it, in comparison to your growth with your equipment, from the first day you started to even where you're at today, how does it compare to what we used with the Spike Brewing?
There's really no comparison. A lot of what we do is, cobbling together different things that you wouldn't even think of as being brewing equipment. We mash in a cooler. We go to the hardware store and we buy some valves and hoses and fittings, but it's, the difference between a system that was completely designed as a unit as opposed to the equipment that we've accumulated over the years. Yeah. And we see a need, we need to make a change, we adapt different things, really kind of a totally different type of a system than the Spike system.
Yeah, it was interesting. The very first, I still remember the very first time we brewed, we made our beer on top of a stove in the kitchen in a little, like a not even a 2-gallon.
Yeah, just a stock pot.
Yeah, we boiled the Wort.
Obviously, everyone's got to start somewhere, and you got to work your way into the hobby, right? For me, I think the equipment, from opening the box and receiving everything, was a little intimidating, like you said, like when you first see it. But it is truly a professional system, but scaled down for the home brewer. After 30 years of making your own home brew, starting on the kitchen, at the kitchen stove and a 2-gallon pot to where you're at today, is involved in the hobby as you are, could you see yourself getting into one of these systems now?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there were several aspects of the system that made the process easier. The way everything is all the same. All the valves are the same. All the fittings are the same. So when it came time to move from one step in the brewing process to another, you get your quick disconnect fittings where you can move your hose from one port to another port, close this valve, open that valve, turn the pump back on. I mean, it definitely is a more streamlined approach, and the equipment is very well thought out in terms of making those steps easy to follow, and having a system that allows you to do those things without having to get out a screwdriver and disconnect a hose
Right.
from a barbed fitting and put it on another one, and some of the things that we deal with on our system.
Yeah. Or just lifting a 5-gallon pot of hot boiling wort or water to pour through.
Exactly.
The other thing I really liked about the system was the controller and being able to control the temperature just with a dial. And the way that we do it, we use turkey fryers and natural propane gas, and yeah, you get pretty good control that way, but not like what that controller does.
I think what's cool about it to me is it seems like a lot of equipment, but once you get it put together and once everything, all the valves are on, all the hoses are on, the pump's mounted to the solo table, it's pretty compact in relation to what you're actually doing. You've got turkey burners, you've got coolers, you've got all this. Truly, we had probably 4 square foot. Everything was on a table sitting in the garage. There wasn't anything to really trip over. They do make a few accessories that we didn't have, like the controller panel where you can mount it so that it becomes part of the table, which is something that I think I'm going to add. And then the Wort chiller. You guys brought over your chiller that you homemade out of a garden hose and copper tubing. And me knowing nothing about the process, I would have loved to have gotten the chiller that they had. Because now that I'm looking at the process, it's like that would have saved so much time had I had that. But you guys brought it and you saved the day with your homemade chiller, which was super cool to tie in there and see how it physically worked. But, it saved days in the process. Literally saved days in the process, which it took 4 weeks to get this beer drinkable, fermented, carbonated, bottled, cooled, everything ready to go. And here we are now out here, beautiful day, nice sunny day, beer, barbecue's just about done. And that's what it's all about. I mean, that's, for me, the cooking aspect has always been a family thing and like getting people together. And I feel that beer is the same way. I don't sit in my house and just slug beers by myself. It's we get together, we talk, we chat, whether it's at the bar laughing and joking and having a good time, or it's out like today, sitting out in the nice weather, sitting out here at the smoker, about to eat. This is what it's all about.
Yep. That's one of the things that we incorporated with our beer making is the get-togethers.
Yeah.
And so every Labor Day, we host a Oktoberfest, and we have all our friends, and our kids now are way, more than old enough to drink beer. And that's what we do is we work towards our Oktoberfest. We just brewed our Oktoberfest beer 2 weeks ago, getting ready for September.
Wow.
But it's all really about friends and family coming together and just enjoying life. That's why we do this, and that's why we've always done this. We've had a great time doing it.
Yes, we have. Yeah, and really, we started that Oktoberfest the first Labor Day after we brewed.
Yeah.
And we've been doing it ever since.
Yeah.
So it's been a nice tradition, and that always has included food, family, friends.
Yeah.
And beer.
And beer.
And beer, yes.
Well, guys, I really appreciate the help. I'm glad that we're here today. And what we're drinking would not have been possible without the knowledge that you brought to the table. Because I guarantee I would have exposed some bacteria somewhere due to my lack of knowledge to the process. But the stuff is delicious. I've shared it with my dad already. I've shared it with my uncle. And now we're out here cracking our first bottles together.
Yep.
And I think, honestly, it turned out great.
Turned out great.
Well, cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys. You know, I'm sitting here editing the video for the Spike Brewing Beginners Bundle and tying this into barbecue. And I can't help but thank Spike Brewing for sponsoring this video and for making my dream of brewing my own beer come true. Brewing beer is something that I've always been interested in. Hell, I've been drinking it for over 10 years. And I've seen the different equipment out there, from the cheap to the relatively expensive, and it always felt intimidating, but at the same time, it just wasn't enough to draw me in. You know, being someone from an engineering background, I've spent the last 15 years working in an engineering environment, and seeing the Spike Brewing Beginners Bundle and their equipment that's included in that, it's truly a work of art, and it is engineering perfection and beer making at its finest. Here, a guy who has never brewed beer in his life could take the instructions that came with the kit, with the bundle, and make an incredible beer in my garage in February when it was like 12 degrees and snowy outside. Granted, I had some help from some friends, but that's what it's all about. It's about bringing people together. It's about the togetherness. And that's why I started this channel at Anderson Smoke Show, making barbecue and bringing my family and friends together. And now I have another avenue of bringing people together, and that's beer. Cheers.